Happy St. Patrick's Day to everyone. Good morning. I like that tie, David. That's excellent. Very nice. Very nice. It has been a very busy week, as you all have experienced just as much as we have, doing some really great work. This has been an exciting and fun week, really trying to do the people's business here in Maryland. And so I'm really proud of where we are in our progress and where things are headed for the deadline that's coming up on Monday for crossover. We had our first double session yesterday, which was long but impactful, and I think we were really successful overall, moving a number of really important and significant pieces of legislation. Some that I really want to highlight that came out this week. It's so many, it's hard to, when they come in a flurry, to really catch each one, but a number of them in and of themselves, if they were their own piece of legislation at a single time, would be a significant accomplishment for the legislative year. So SB 1, of course, the Gun Safety Act of 2023. I'm really proud of the work that the committee did and that we did in the Senate to set up a new framework to address the issues presented by the Supreme Court and the Bruen decision. We have Senate Bill 144, which is the energy efficiency incentives for low-income housing. What we know is that with inflation and the cost of energy, it is increasingly difficult to make sure that our incentive programs reach the people who need it most, which are our low-income residents. And so this is going to be a bill that makes it easier for them. Firearms, restricting firearms surrendered under final protective order, Senate Bill 185. Senate Bill 104, the Apprenticeship 2030 Commission. This is going to be one of the term bills. At the beginning of the year, we talked about setting up a 4-year term. The Senate Bill 104 really does that around workforce and thinking differently about workforce development. Senate Bill 341, which has to do with expanding health care and reproductive right access in higher education facilities across the state of Maryland. Senate Bill 379, which is the election law ballot processing. This is the bill that we wish we had last year. Unfortunately, was vetoed, not for anything that was in the bill, but for apparently what was not in the bill. This year, we have passed it with a new administration that we expect to sign it into law so that we can process our ballots effectively. We had the Child Victims Act of 2023, which was Senate Bill 686, which we moved forward on third reader yesterday. This is just a really, a bill that dealing with some of the most painful experiences that any individual could ever experience as a child in sexual abuse, and gives justice, an avenue for justice for victims. The WIND bill, which is on third reader today, which expands and hopefully puts Maryland on the forefront of investing in the new economy. We had the paid family and medical leave program is moving forward. This sets out the guardrails and the guidelines for what our Maryland's paid family and medical leave system will look like, which will be an enormous improvement moving forward. And the firearm safety storage requirements for youth suicide prevention, which I think was a very impressive bipartisan bill that moved forward. And I think we're all recognizing the impact and danger of unsecured firearms. The more firearms that exist, the more firearms are used in suicide and used as illegal guns to commit crimes. And so that is fundamentally, all of these pieces of legislation dealing with firearms have been focused on making sure that we can reduce the number of firearms in communities. We've been working very closely with the governor on a number of pieces of legislation this year. Almost every one of the governor's pieces of package pieces are moving forward in one way or another. I think that it has been a very collaborative approach from the beginning. The legislature and the executive always will have different perspectives, even when we're all trying to travel in the same direction. And so I'm really pleased with the progress that we're making. I think that it's been more collaborative and more cordial in the approach, and where there have been differences, we've had real, honest, thoughtful policy conversations about why the Senate or members of the legislature feel one way versus the executive. And I think that we're all moving in unison with changes, and that's what the legislative process is about. We had the Access to Banking Act that has moved forward. The Healthcare for Heroes Act moved forward last night. The Fair Wage Act also moved forward, and the governor's signature legislation, which was Senate Bill 551, the SERVE Act, was really kind of the model of how I think we can move forward together. The governor had a visionary idea about service year for for recent high school graduates. There was an existing program that the legislature has worked on over the years. We spent a lot of time working with the administration, with members of the Senate, to come up with a program that incorporates what has existed with the new idea that the governor has presented. And I think everyone is on board moving forward with this particular piece of legislation, codifies the executive order. This is what the process is supposed to look like. And I'm really, it's proof is in the pudding, and the pudding is here. It's working. So it's been strong collaboration. I'm really excited to keep moving forward as we get to the last 25 days here in session. Last thing I want to touch before kind of opening up is the budget, which will be moving forward in the Senate today. We are largely, on the most part, on the same page with the House and the administration. The Senate's version will have a few substantive differences, but fundamentally, at the end of the day, you'll see a significant investment in the Blueprint for Maryland's future. We're taking $800 million, which is an enormous amount of money to put into the Blueprint Fund for future year costs. This is demonstrating our ongoing commitment to make sure that we are investing in our public schools as not just sufficiently, but above the line, above what we are required to spend this year. We are putting money away for future years so that in the case of any type of downturn, we can make sure that our number one value of protecting public education is front and center. We're going to make some small adjustments on the transportation funding piece to give the administration just a bit more flexibility on potential interim investments with the federal government should the Department of Transportation move forward on any particular grant opportunities that are now available because the enormous amount of federal dollars available. Overall, I'm really proud of the work of our Budget and Taxation Committee, and we look forward to bringing the bill to the floor next week. And I think it will be a very successful end of session, working with the administration and the House to land the budget in a very thoughtful, fiscally responsible way. So actually, final note is I just do want to thank members of the Senate. We had some tough issues this week, particularly when emotions are high and near crossover. And I thought the debate was very respectful and really a model of what we look like when we are at our best, trying to bring hard issues to the fore, talk about them publicly, and figure out the best way to move forward. And I think that's what democracy should look like, and I'm proud of the Senate and how we've approached it thus far this week. So,
thank you. Getting back to Senate Bill 686, how do you think that moves forward? Is the House version of it rolled into it? Will the lawmakers simply take the Senate version of the child sex abuse bill and just push it to the governor's desk?
It's a question for the House. We've had conversations about things that we believe that the House sponsor and members who have been very supportive in the past believe are workable compromises. I don't want to speak on their behalf, but I suspect that they feel comfortable with where we've landed in the Senate.
President Ferguson, you talked about pre-crossover accomplishments. You have today, tomorrow, and Monday to get things over to the House before crossover, the end of crossover day. What are you anticipating will make it before the finish line, and what are you hoping you can push even after crossover day has passed?
Yeah, I think the ones that I've listed were really our focus in making sure that the Senate versions were that we had those out into the House in time. There are a few things that are not, that we will probably move after the crossover deadline, which just means that we'll be relying on the House Rules Committee to move it forward to get to the Standing Committee. The Senate's version of the cannabis legislation will be one that probably goes after the crossover deadline, which I think everybody agrees we have to get done this year, so I'm not concerned about that one. The Maryland 529 program, which was filed late as a result of a number of different reasons, but I think is the right legislation. And I think there's agreement with the House that we want to move that program to the Treasurer's Office and wind down the prepay program. So I feel good about that one coming afterwards. The other one that we're working on, and this is because of the budget implications, are the governor's EITC and military retiree. So the child welfare, child poverty reduction, and the military retiree tax exemptions. Those are going to align with the budget, so we will probably take those up after the crossover deadline.
President Ferguson, you said before that you had a record number of budget requests this year, almost $2 billion.
They keep coming too.
And they keep coming, oh no. Well, what got left on the cutting room floor that you didn't really want to have to say no to? And what do you expect from the cutting room floor you'll pick up next year?
So, I think that there are a number of different one-time expenditures, and I think the bigger challenge probably had to do with the structural budget and making sure that we were in the out years structurally stable, and we made a recommendation that we wanted to have $100 million of flex in the structural budget, which is really important for the uncertainty of the economy moving forward. And so we are not spending to zero. We are making sure that there is a fiscally responsible cushion. There are things like the film production tax credit, which I have been an enormous supporter of. I think has done enormously positive things. The governor's budget has it at 12 million. Our hope was to bring it to 25 million. I think when we had the revenue write-down and the structural write-down for revenues, that's one of the ones that we may not get to the full 25 million this year, which we were hoping to, and might be ratcheted down slightly. There's some affordable housing investments that we really wanted to make, that making sure that we can invest in more affordable housing across the state of Maryland, that we're not going to be able to do as much as we hoped that we were going to be able to do. And so I still feel very confident that we've prioritized our values around education, public safety, transportation, ensuring that our environment is protected. So I feel very, very good with our budget. I think it's the level of investment that in certain areas that maybe will be a little bit more constricted than was previously.
The blueprint money that you referenced, go ahead.
I'll
I'll go ahead.
Go ahead, Brian.
The blueprint money that you referenced for clarity, is that part of what the Senate is adding in that you were, Richard, or has the House done that already?
So the House added it on top of what the governor had done. So the governor had put in 500, and so both the House and Senate will be going above that 500 million level and making sure that we can put in money today that we know is not going to be used for this fiscal year. It will be used in subsequent years when it looks as though the budget will be tighter as the blueprint gets further implemented.
Was that the origin of the thought process to do more, that it's looking like the budget's going to get tighter, so you better do it now?
I think that we want to be very thoughtful and make sure that we are prioritizing public education. It's a major commitment that we have made, and we want to make sure that we follow through with it. And so I think should things get tighter moving forward, we've seen what's happening in the world with Swiss banks and our banks in California. We want to be mindful that our top and most important priority, which is investing in education, is taken care of.
If you're adding this 300 million, what are you taking away from?
So one of the areas is the governor's initial budget had a $500 million investment in transportation projects generally, but we're not allocated towards specific projects. And so we are adjusting that number and shifting some of those unspecified dollars into the blueprint for future years, but leaving a little bit more than the House left for potential opportunities to invest in transportation.
The governor's budget included phasing out the Boost program, and I think you've said in the past that you support, keeping the amount of money at the levels that it currently is. I just wanted to find out if you could sort of talk about that decision, why you think that that's a program that should continue, given the fact that it is for private schools.
Yeah, look, I think if most importantly, we're investing in Maryland's public schools. And I think the additional $800 million above what is required for us this year, $800 million, being invested in the Blueprint Fund is a clear and obvious recognition of the Senate's commitment to making sure that, without a doubt, number one, we have to make sure that we are fully funding our public schools. We'll see what happens today in the committee. I believe that there will be an amendment to restore the funds that had been cut to not phase down the program. For me personally, I've seen a number of low-income students in my own district really excel and succeed in schools that are doing really great work for them, both academically and socio-emotionally. And so, my thoughts are that so long as we are fully funding our public schools and doing more than is expected for our public schools, that we should have students in different circumstances should have the opportunity as well. And so first and foremost is our public schools. We're in a fortunate place to be able to also maintain, I think, the Boost program, which also with a number of communities who I think it's a top issue, and we want to make sure that if we have the ability and the resources to keep that opportunity open, we will.
We haven't talked about east-west transportation in the Baltimore region. The House and the Senate are removing money, $500 million from transportation. What does that mean for getting an east-west transportation line system done in the near term?
Well, I think one of the funds that we are keeping and adjusting from the House's version of the budget includes an additional $100 million for some additional flexibility for investments that may be possible, particularly competitive grant agreements that we could enter into with the federal government. In the House's version, there was $100 million left for largely an environmental study for a revised or reviewed Red Line and a Southern Maryland transportation light rail system, both of which are incredibly important projects, but do require some level of environmental impact review. And so the dollars that are left over or that are not left over, that are being fenced for those purposes, also will have additional flexible dollars that in the case that the state can move forward with a competitive grant program for either of those projects, there will be more flexible money available to invest in. So there's a lot that has to be figured out over the next few months, particularly the next 6 months during the interim, about how these projects can both get done and be financed. And so we want to make sure that the administration has that flexibility during the interim to start on that planning process. And so that's where the Senate has landed, and I'm sure we'll have productive conversations with the House.
If you're someone that lives in the area who is really looking forward to a fix like this, to be able to have a little mobility to improve your lot in life and have a better job, realistically, what do you tell them? How long is their wait for this?
Look, I think that this is the challenge with transportation projects, is that they're never fast and they're never easy. That is the nature of investing in transportation infrastructure. They are big projects. They have lots of implications. They have a lot of reporting that is required, and we've got to make sure that we're making the right investment for the next 50 years. And so we need to work as expeditiously as possible, which I believe the administration is, but we also have to be thoughtful and do it the right way. We can't find ourselves 4 years from now doubting a decision and then losing it all again. And so, I wouldn't be able to put a timeline. I think it's still too early to put a timeline on it. I know the administration has prioritized certainly the east-west corridor for the Baltimore region. I think that is the right prioritization, but we also know that that's not the only priority. We have to move forward there. We also have to figure out a solution for 495, American Legion Bridge and 495, and we also have to figure out a solution for Southern Maryland. And so all of these are very big projects that are going to take a lot of time and energy. And so I think that I have confidence in the administration moving forward, and I suspect we'll have a little bit more specifics next legislative session.
Missing from your bullet points was the Bay Bridge. Is the Bay Bridge off the table?
No, I don't think the Bay Bridge is off the table. I think that, I look forward to the administration's review of the project as well. I haven't heard specifics one way or the other, but that's another very, very important project. You can see the infrastructure needs that we have. You'll see from the Senate an amendment coming to a bill about transportation infrastructure financing that the House moved forward around Garvey bonds and some bonding authority for road projects. We are going to incorporate an amendment that sets up a blue ribbon commission about financing for transportation and tries to bring in all of the various experts, all of the different modes, really think about technology. This is something we've been talking about for the last few years, that as we electrify, which is the absolute right way to go, it has an impact on our gas tax. Additionally, we know that there are going to be changes in technology to train technology, to the port, to the airport, trying to really get a sense of what do the next 10 years look like for our transportation infrastructure needs and how do we finance it appropriately. And so we'll be moving that forward. That'll be probably after crossover, but it's a bill that will, something that we're going to be working on, a House bill that was sent over already.
Mr. President, I have a question for you as the senator from the 46th.
Yes,
If
please.
you don't mind. This morning, the City Senate delegation moved forward a bill that I understand is required to facilitate this transition to local control of Baltimore Police Department. It sounds like not everybody's on the same page with the details, and I'm a little out of my depth here, but what are your thoughts on the prospects of getting the right legislation done by sine die to facilitate this?
Well, look, I think the voters spoke, and that's clear, and the voters said they want local control. And I think that is what we are moving forward and committed to doing. The question that I think is the sticking point is, do we want local control will exist no matter what with this legislation? Should we have the city council be in charge of the daily operations of the police department, or should the mayor and the commissioner as executive agencies be in charge of the daily operations of the police department? That's the sticking point. And so, as a legislator, I often have a very heavy bias towards the legislative branch, but I also have come to understand the value and importance of executive agencies having the authority to be able to execute on a daily basis. And so I think that's the question. What the bill that we move forward matches what almost every other jurisdiction has some level of balance between what are the legislative powers for police power versus the executive powers for police powers. And so that's the philosophical difference I think that exists right now. And we moved it forward today, and I think it was the right decision.
President
On minimum
Ferguson,
wage,
go ahead.
thanks. On minimum wage, you've talked about not including indexing in that bill. I'm wondering if you could speak to that decision, but also whether it is something that you would include in the future.
I think we're here every year, and that's an important point. And we've touched and impacted and raised the minimum wage, I think 3 of the last 12 years that I've been in the legislature. And so, I think that we have to take into account all of the impacts of raising the minimum wage. Certainly something I've been extremely supportive of in the past as well as this year. But there are very real impacts for local governments, for our Medicaid providers. And so, to have an automatic process that doesn't take into account all of the other factors, I think was where the legislature decided, we are back every 9 months. And so if this is an issue that comes up and we continue to see inflation not get tempered by the federal government or by the Federal Reserve, we may have to come back and do it again, but that's our job. And so, I feel like moving and accelerating was the right way to go. And so, indexing, I just think we don't need indexing because we're here every year.
Mr. President, the Legislative Black Caucus has identified the cannabis odor bill as, to eliminate as a pretext to search a car or a person. It passed the House. Is that something that may cross the finish line?
Yeah, I think we will see something move forward this year for sure. This is an important issue. I think as we move forward with legalization of cannabis and have an adult use marketplace, we should treat cannabis the same way as we do alcohol and tobacco. And so the details matter, and we're making sure that we get it right. And so, I haven't had a chance to review the House bill in depth, but I'm confident that we'll move something forward this year that makes sure that some of the harms of the past of unduly using the odor of cannabis as a pretext or pre-context, the sole context for a search, I don't think is the right way to go. And so I think it is a factor, just like we've seen the use of other substances that are legal and should be like that moving forward.
The Office of the Public Defender came out with a letter describing conditions at the Baltimore County Jail that juveniles are enduring while they're held there pre-trial. A lot of this would be resolved by the YES Act, which is the bill that would start all kids charged with crimes in juvenile court. Maryland Matters published an op-ed by Chair Smith, I believe in late 2021, saying that he was in support of not starting kids in the justice system, the criminal justice system in adult court. JPR held a briefing about this earlier this year. There's been no movement, and advocates have been really vocal about supporting it. Do you see it moving forward?
I think that this is an important issue and a very hard conversation. Especially, I think it's important to be mindful of some of the really horrific tragedies that we've seen in the Baltimore region. It's, we are not in a good place when it comes to really making sure that some of our most impacted juvenile young people are changing their behaviors, and that we're providing the interventions to shift how they engage in the world. And the level of firearm violence that we're seeing amongst juveniles is totally unacceptable. I don't know that this is a particular answer either way. The one challenge I will say is that in a number of these cases, we have seen victims or perpetrators who have been a part of the juvenile services system. And what I have continuously been frustrated by is it is clear to me, particularly as we've seen a rise in really serious young crimes by young people, is that we're not seeing the level of success of the services at the Department of Juvenile Justice that any of us should be satisfied with. And so it is difficult to say that we should be placing a greater burden on the juvenile system before we know whether or not the services that they already control are sufficient. Secondly, I would say, in some of the more heinous crimes, which unfortunately we've experienced too much, in the juvenile system as Maryland law exists, and this is not the same for every state, the juvenile system ends at 21. It ends at 18, but really 21 with exception. And so in some of the more challenging systems or situations, kind of the worst cases, the rape and murder, under the current law, if it goes through the juvenile system, no matter the case, there's no redetermination, there's no impact. If a 17-year-old is found to be involved under the juvenile system and that individual has been 21 or turns 21, the system is done. There's no rethought, it is just an end. And so I think we have to have a real conversation about what is the impact of that moving forward, and should we, if we are gonna change the direct file, are we also gonna look at the 21-year-old restrictions?
To follow up, the bill would allow, it would switch the burden. So instead of a child's defense attorney filing a waiver to put them back down in the juvenile justice system, the prosecution would waive them up. So it doesn't preclude a child being tried in adult court.
Agreed.
Additionally, there is a federal measure that Maryland could potentially be in violation of by holding children in adult jails. Are you saying, based on what you just said, are you saying that you support holding children in adult jail? Like, is there, like, can you clarify a little?
I'm not aware of that federal position, so I can't speak to the specifics of that particular provision. I mean, my presumption is that if there's still the waiving up ability to be tried in adult court, that would also be in violation. So I'm not aware of the situation. Look, I think kids are kids. I think that the preference is that the juvenile system be for kids, and I think that that's fundamentally where I am and have been. I do think that we have to have a real conversation about the level of services and interventions that are happening in the department currently. And I don't think that they are sufficient. And I think that we have a new secretary that has been charged with really figuring out how do we change and deter and intervene the right way so that we can prevent future occurrences. In the worst of the worst scenarios, it is the part that gets most attention. I am mostly concerned about the 95%, to make sure that 95%, and that none of the 95% of kids who don't do the worst of the worst, that they don't become part of the 2.5% that are committing the worst crimes. And so that, to me, is where the most important focus needs to be.
Mr. President, there's a key difference between the House and the Senate on the issue of healthcare benefits for the National Guard. The House wants to turn TRICARE into a study and seems to have removed the money. Would the Senate go along with a study in the current budget?
So we just moved forward a bill that sort of caps and provides a rebate process. It's not quite as, it was a cost containment measure, but I would say there's also reason to look to make sure that we do this the right way. The National Guard is a very interesting federal and state responsibility. And so we needed to make sure that the health care that's provided, both at the federal level or the state level, we want to provide a benefit. And let me just say that again. I am so incredibly thankful for our National Guard, National Guards men and women. We just honored a number of them on the Senate floor yesterday. You think about the COVID experience, it was the National Guard that was absolutely instrumental in making sure that the vaccine distribution was improved and became one of the best in the country. It is their focus on logistics and serving their community. They are just remarkable individuals. And so we wanted to make sure in the Senate that we could move forward. We do have to figure out what is the right way to deal with this complicated issue. And so I feel good about where we are, but I am certainly committed, and I think the Senate is entirely committed in looking at this moving forward to make sure that we do it in a way that is the maximum benefit for those who are serving our communities.
Is that a no on the study?
We have time for one more question.
Do you have an update on how support is growing or is maintaining for the police superintendent, state police superintendent?
You know, I think there have been a number of conversations. I think that the superintendent is working hard to speak with individual members, and particularly those members who have expressed any level of concern. I think we'll have the hearing on the 27th, and we'll see where we are then.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you all.